I've been waiting 2 years for this moment. Well, I don't think a lot of people thought we would ever get here, but the Odin device is now shipping. In this video, we're going to do a first impressions and an unboxing of the Odin Pro. Full disclosure before we get started, this retail device was sent to me for the purposes of this review. I have tested earlier versions of this as a beta tester, but this is the first time that I'm seeing this device in its retail form. The last software version that I've tested on Odin dates all the way back to June of last year, so this is going to be the first time that I've seen any of the latest software changes that they've done to this device. Here we have the black Odin retail box with the gold logo on the front. This is a two-part box with an inlet in the middle and an AYN sticker on the side. The back of my box has seen better days, and if we look over here on the print on the back, we can see that this has a lot of RAM. The only thing in the box besides the manual is a USB Type-A to Type-C cable. There is no charger brick with this. You have to buy the Super Pack version with the dock included to get a wall charger. That's just something to be aware of. I already have a charger, so I'm not that worried. Okay, let's take a look at what we have here. This is one of the IGG exclusive devices, and it's actually my favorite color combination that they offer. This is the US Super Nintendo style with a cold gray shell, dark gray buttons, dark purple B and A buttons, and light purple X and Y buttons. There are a few versions of this device, and the one that I'm featuring in this video is the Odin Pro model. The Odin Pro comes with a Snapdragon 845 processor and an Adreno 630 GPU clocked at 787 MHz. We have 8GB of LPDDR4X RAM, 128GB of UFS 2.1 storage, a 6600 mAh battery, and a 5.9-inch 1080p IPS display. For connectivity, we have Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5.0. This device runs on Android 10 and Windows 11, but this video will only focus on Android 10. I'll be covering Windows 11 and how amazing it is in another video, so make sure to get subscribed so you don't miss when that video drops. On the left side of the device, you can see that we have a microphone hole in the top left-hand corner. Under that is our left analog stick, and this has L3 functionality. Under the analog stick is our D-pad, and as you can see, this looks like a Vita D-pad. There are a few companies that use this style, but they don't ever replicate the actual feeling of a Vita D-pad. This D-pad actually feels very similar to the Vita D-pad, and in fact it's the closest feeling to an actual Vita D-pad that I've ever seen in this market. There's nothing else that's close. It has great travel, and it feels very good to pivot. Under the D-pad is the Odin logo, which is slightly darker than I thought it would be. Under the home button are ABXY buttons, and you can see that these have screen printing on them for the button letter. If I'm really trying to nitpick, I can see that the X and the Y labels are not perfectly centered. Below this is our right analog stick, and this also has R3 functionality. Finishing off the front are our select and start buttons in the bottom right hand corner. Something that I want to point out before we move on are the differences in the D-pad and ABXY buttons. The D-pad is using dome switches, just like the Vita, and the ABXY buttons are using conductive rubber. Anyone that's used an Xbox controller will recognize this control scheme because on the Xbox controller they use both conductive rubber for the ABXY buttons and dome switches for the D-pad. On the top of the device we have a set of stacked shoulder buttons with analog L2 and R2 triggers. The L1 and R1 buttons use a tack switch, and I'm able to get input across the entire range of the button. Our analog L2 and R2 triggers are a first for an Android handheld. These use a Hall sensor, which is basically just a magnet that provides analog values the closer it is to the sensor. The great thing about using this style of input is that it doesn't have any friction, and hence, there are less parts that can fail over time. If you've used something like the Razer Kishi, you know how bad analog triggers can sound if they use a mechanism that implements a friction-based design. Finishing off the top, we have our power button, power indicator, volume up, volume down, the air exhaust vent, and a flap with an SD card slot and a micro HDMI port. On the bottom, we have 2 speakers, a headphone jack, and our Type-C charging port with DisplayPort functionality. Now I want to go over the back. You can see that we have 2 air intake vents and a third one over the fan. On the left and the right side of the grips, we have M1 and M2. I can't remember if I've ever talked about it before, but Odin has really nice grips on the left and the right side that make the device very easy to hold and very comfortable to use. Also on the side, you will see that we have our LED light rail that I've talked about before, and we'll look at that in just a moment. For now, let's do a first boot. Now we're going to go through the new user experience. Here we are on the welcome screen, which should look very familiar to some of you guys. We're just going to go over to Next, 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 skip that. And for the launcher, I'm just going to pick the one that is default. I'm going to use gestures because I'm not an animal, and then we're going to start. All right, here we are. Let's check out the brightness. Okay, we're on low, so we're going to have to bring that up. Let's take a look at the stock UI for a moment. You can see right now we're using a launcher that doesn't seem to have a drawer, so all of your icons are going to be right here. We have Google Chrome, the Play Store, a music app, gallery, clock, and some other stuff. If we go into the settings, we can see that this is pretty much just stock AOSP Android. In here, we have an Odin settings section. If I press this toggle switch, we can turn on the LEDs. You can see right now that they're not that bright, so I'm going to shut off the studio lights to be able to see what they look like. If you've watched the intro video, you already know how these look. I think they look pretty cool, but they're not RGB. AYN said that they might sell RGB upgrade kits in the future. Let's completely go over the stock experience now. If we go to the pull-down menu, we can take a look at what we have here. They have a brightness control slider that notifies you when you're at high power consumption, which seems to happen around 75%. We also have a few quick toggle options. We have standard things like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. We also have something called standard mode. Let's click that. So I think this just provides CPU performance control. We have a standard mode, performance, and then we have high performance, and I will have to check what the differences are for those later. For now, we're going to go back to standard. We also have an ambient light toggle, and if we press that, we can control the joysticks and the lights individually. Another important toggle is the fan control. In here, we can turn on the toggle to enable the fan. We can see that we have quiet, sport, and smart modes, but I'm not doing anything right now, so I'm going to shut the fan off. And those seem to be about the only relevant things here, except for the dark mode theme. Okay, let's go into the Odin launcher now. This is something that I showed off last year around this time, and I haven't seen anything that they've done to this in the last half year. So we can see that we have some swipe bars on the left and the right. We have brightness, storage, TV settings, and sleep. We also have quick access to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and airplane mode. Our brightness slider opens up this overlay kind of awkwardly on top of the menu. Pressing storage opens up a cool menu in the center, and we can see all of our storage options on the device. Right now, I don't have an SD card, so we're just showing the internal storage. If we go to TV settings, we have 4K or 1080p, so I'm just going to put this into 1080p, and it's going to ask me to reboot, but I'm going to reboot later. We have a temperature sensor in this menu, but I'm not sure what they're pulling because 26 Celsius is pretty low. Under this, we can see the amount of RAM that we have free. We can close the menu by pressing L3. Now let's take a look at the other side. We can swipe this one. Here, we have some other settings that are available in the top pull-down menu, along with some organization for the apps that are included in the system. We also have dark mode or light mode theme. We also have a dark mode or a light mode theme for this launcher. I'm going to put the launcher into light mode after I click this. So we don't have anything in games right now, and we don't have anything in entertainment or productivity, but I think in these system apps, we should have a few things there. The corner has a few things that I want to go over. We have open settings, layout, and wallpaper. I'm going to press the layout button. It seems to scroll through 4 different layout options, which is one more than the last I've seen on this, and the open settings window just opens up some of the other stuff that's available inside the Android settings window. We can control the joystick LEDs, the video output mode, and we can control what happens when we are using video output. In this menu, we have access to our audio profiles. This is actually something that I had at hand in testing. A cool thing about Odin is that you can change the DSP profile. The default profile is one that favors bass frequencies, and it's actually really nice and has a really nice low end that's great for media consumption and gaming. But we also have a second profile that you can use that favors treble, and it has a really nice high end. You can change between the two if you want by just restarting the device. We have a few other options remaining in this menu. We can change our ABXY mode. We can use the Odin style or the Xbox style, and I think that this will just change the device to be recognized as an Xbox controller, or at least it should. We can also alter the input of the shoulder buttons to be analog, digital, or both. And then everything else here is pretty much self-explanatory. Now at this point, everything is pretty much ready to go. I could connect to Wi-Fi and add my Google account, and then I would be able to install any games or emulators that I want. Unfortunately, I need to put a VPN on this device before I can use the Google Play Store, so I'm going to do that and configure the rest of the device off camera and then jump forward after everything is already done. Okay, so here we are, everything is all set up now. Between now and the last clip, I put a VPN on the device and I have Google Play going. I also went ahead and installed all of the games and emulators that I want to use for this video and some of the future ones that I'm working on. For those of you that are on the Taki Discord, you've probably already seen some of the behind the scenes footage that I'm about to go over right now. I've never done this before, but I decided to do a live stream setting up the emulators for this device and answering any questions that people had along the way. Now, before we move on any further, let's go over some of the things that I've done off camera. I'm going to go into the Odin launcher now, and I've already gone ahead and configured these emulators individually, and I've organized them inside this launcher. This is the games section of the launcher, and you can see this by swiping the left side of your screen or pressing L3. All of these emulators are added one by one, and you can reposition them by holding down on the icon and then going over to the reposition button and then holding it down again until it gets bigger, and then you can move it around on your screen. So let's just go over some of the things that we have here. I have RetroArch with a few cores already installed, 3 Dolphin emulators, Citra, Drastic, a PS2 emulator, PSP, PS1, 2 Sega Dreamcast emulators, Sega Saturn, and a few other apps. And I'm going to add a few more games to this because I have added other ones after I did this. So to add a new game, all we do is press the plus sign. And then we can see the games that we haven't added yet. And almost all of these are games. So I can just tap them individually and they will get added to the system. And then we can go and see they're all visible here. We can reposition them again, or we can change the color. So for example, this has a blue background. I could change this to orange if I wanted, and now it has that icon. I'm just going to quickly go over to entertainment. We're going to do the same thing. This time we're going to use the buttons. So we can do the same thing with the D-pad. And there we are. I'm going to go more in depth in a lot of the software here because there's a lot of things going on. But one of the things that I want to point out are the performance modes for this device. Here we are in Dead or Alive 2 in RetroArch, and we can see that the FPS is basically at 60. Let's go into the settings really quick and take a look at our resolution options. Let's go to 2400. Okay, we can see that our FPS is starting to go down. We're in the 50s. We are in the standard mode right now. Let's activate performance mode. If we activate performance mode, we automatically enable the quiet setting on the fan, and I will do a sound test of the fan profiles in just a moment. So we're at 60 FPS now. Let's go higher than this. Let's go to 2880. Okay, you can see that the FPS is starting to drop down again. Now let's enable the next performance mode, which is high performance. That's going to force the fan to the sport setting, but we could also use smart. Sport is pretty high, so I'm just going to put this on smart. Let's see what happens to the FPS. Some games really rely on the GPU frequency when you want to upscale them, and using the higher performance modes are going to allow your GPU to overclock to a higher speed. I've shown an earlier version of this off before, but I think they've done a lot of changes to the screen mapping technology, so I want to show that off now. So here we are in Genshin Impact, and I don't have anything mapped for this game. If I swipe over to the right, you can see that I have a context menu for this game. There's a key adapter, a guide, a key test, profiles, and a couple of toggle switches. First thing that you'll see is we can change the brightness with this slider. We have an FPS counter. We also have the thermal temperature from our CPU usage, and our RAM consumption. First thing I'm going to do is press FPS so we can get the floating FPS counter. And that's going to be all the way here. I'm going to put that in the middle. And we're going to swipe back over to the right and we're going to start the key mapping process. So where it says key adapter, I'm going to press that. And then I have this window here that I can use to map my buttons. So let's map some of the easy stuff first. We'll get the right analog stick over here for movement. And then another analog stick here for changing our direction. And we'll map the button for run, jumping, attacking, and the special abilities. Then I'm going to change the analog stick for the right stick, and I'm going to change that to adjust view mode. Then I'm going to click save, and then I'm going to click OK. Okay, so the profile is now set. We can change our rotation. I've also enabled something in the developer options so that way you can see how this is working. And that's basically all there is to it to get a device to support the controls in this device if there's not native support for this gamepad. While we're on the topic of Genshin Impact, this is a good time to talk about thermal throttling on Odin. As you can see right now, our FPS is at 30, and we're going to go into the settings really quick to check on our graphic options. So if we go down to graphics, we have everything set to medium. And we have our FPS set to 30, so we're going to change that to 60. And I'm just going to customize some of these options. Okay, I have everything to their lowest values, but I have the FPS set to 60. Now let's close. We can see our FPS is at 44 FPS. On the left side of the screen, we have some interesting information. We have our CPU frequencies, our temperatures, and our GPU frequency. You can see that our GPU frequency is basically at the bottom, and our CPU temperature is at 50. On the standard profile setting, you're basically going to be getting the thermal throttling that you would on a phone, except it's going to take longer to throttle since we have passive cooling in this device. But we can ramp things up if we just move the thermal throttle target forward. So right now we're throttling at around 48 to 50 Celsius, and we can increase that by changing this mode to the next option. We could turn on the fan by itself right now. If we toggle the fan, we have our 3 modes here, and the quiet setting is pretty quiet. But what I'm going to do is just turn on the performance mode. Now we can see the CPU temperature can go higher than it was before, and our FPS counter can also go higher. You'll also notice at this point that the GPU frequency is no longer at the minimum setting. At this setting, you're pretty much good to go for Genshin Impact, but if you really wanted to push things, and again, it's not worth it because you're going to be consuming a ton of battery power to do this, you could turn on the next profile to get even more performance out of this device. Right now, the device is using about 1.5 amps of power to get this performance, and this is like an extreme edge case for Android. If we want to push things further, we could enable the high performance mode, which will allow the GPU frequency to get to 787, which is the overclock on Odin. Now we're in the high performance mode, and you'll see occasionally our GPU frequency will go to 787. You'll also notice that we're almost at 2 amps of power at this point. This would mean that you would be getting around 3 hours of battery life in the extreme use case of a game like Genshin Impact. But your FPS is also pretty good. Before moving on, I think it's time to go over the fan noise of this device. So as you can see, I have a volume meter on the right-hand corner of your screen, and this is going to show the volume of the fan at different profiles. The standing noise in this room is around 30 decibels, so now we're going to see what the standing noise is with the quiet fan setting turned on. This is the quiet fan noise, and as you can see, it is pretty quiet. This is an example of what it sounds like up to the microphone. There's a smart mode, which has a fan curve to it, but I'm going to skip over that and go right to sports mode so we can see a worst case scenario for this device. So as you can hear, this is actually pretty loud in the background. I typically only use this mode if I'm going to be using headphones because it is pretty loud, but it does give you better performance. And here's how it sounds like up to the microphone. It definitely is loud. We're going to cover more on thermals on this device in my next video, but I wanted to just cover this briefly since it's easy to go over, and I think a lot of people are worried about the fan noise on this device. I would say, generally speaking, the quiet setting on this is going to be equivalent to the average noise that you would hear on a switch light. Alright, let's talk about the ergonomics of the device because this is something that's pretty simple to go over. Obviously, the biggest comparison that we could make for the Odin is the Switch Lite, and I think that if you're someone that owns both of these devices, you will clearly see that the Odin device is better than the Switch Lite in many ways, especially when it comes to ergonomics. Let's look at some of the key differences here. On the Odin device, our analog sticks are sitting lower, so it's easier to press things like the ABXY buttons and switch over to the right analog stick, whereas on the Switch, the right analog stick is slightly raised. It's very easy to hit the stick when you are pressing the B button, and it's annoying to go back and forth. This is a completely different situation on Odin, where we can easily get to those buttons and hit this joystick without having any interference when we are playing. The next area where we will see that this Switch falls apart is in the grip department. We actually have a grip on Odin, whereas the Switch is just a flat back. If you do go from using the Odin back to the Switch, it just feels terrible. I kind of just accepted that it's bad and I've learned to live with it. But then when you ever do use something that has grips, man, it's just hard to ever go back to the Switch Lite. The Switch also lacks analog triggers for games, but we have a full range of motion on Odin. The D-pad on Odin is also better than it is on the Switch Lite, which isn't surprising because the Switch Lite D-pad is pretty terrible. It's just passable, and you can't really use it for anything important. It can pivot, but it's not a good experience. This is much better on Odin. There are other handhelds that use this Vita-style D-pad, but they don't actually feel like a Vita at all. They just have the shape. If you look at this one, it's just a terrible experience. It's raised up very high, and it just bottoms out completely when you press the middle. It's also very difficult to get any kind of reasonable pivot going. One of the most important aspects of the Vita was that it's actually very great for pivoting. It can sink into the frame a little bit, and you have very good actuation. If we do the same thing on the Odin device, you can see that it's not absurdly high. It has play, just like the Vita, and even though it has dome switches, it's very comfortable to use. It's not a solid rock like the XP. Most importantly, if we press down in the center, we can't go flat. So if you can see it, I press down in the center and nothing happens because the post is there. If we do the same thing on the GPD device and press down in the center, the whole thing bottoms out. So we don't bottom out on Odin because this D-pad was done correctly and we can pivot very well. So far, we're going 2 for 2. I have had less time to test the ABXY buttons because these were a recent change. I have had less time to test the new ABXY buttons because these were recently changed. Odin used to have dome switches for the ABXY buttons, and it now uses conductive rubber. It's a big shock going from one to the other when I've built up muscle memory for the dome switches, but I really think that this is much better than the old Odin devices. It's just clear as day that this is a far better ABXY situation. Now I know the next thing that people are going to want to see is how robust is this case. So let's do the exact same thing that I did on the RG552 video, and I'm really trying now to flex this. If I do this anymore, I think I could crack the screen. I can't get any play out of this thing. It's like a tank. I can't get it to move. This is the Switch Lite. Yeah, I can bend it easy. It's super easy to warp the Switch Lite. Even this one is like spinning. I already showed the 552 and it's just using a plastic frame, so this thing is just super easy to move around without trying. I am shocked at how robust Odin is because the CNC devices and the early prototypes were not this strong. The next thing that I want to talk about is the fit and finish. This thing has a semi-smooth surface to it. I'm not sure how well this is going to come across on camera, but I'm now checking for fingerprint rejection on the cold gray shell, and it's doing an amazing job. That's part of the reason why I wanted this color so much. Rejection is worse on the Switch Lite, but that is using a darker color. There doesn't seem to be any big difference in the paint used on either device. Let's do a quick sound test of the default DSP profile on Odin against the Switch Lite using the same game. You should be able to tell that Odin is both louder and has better bass. You can also check the picture quality. I'll have more detailed information on the display in another video, but I did want to say that I checked for light bleeding, and it seems very well controlled. This is already getting to be a pretty big video, so let's wrap up things with some Android games. There will be a video on emulation coming out soon, so make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss it. First up, we have Genshin Impact with the FPS cap set to 60. This is something that I randomly found while getting the other games. This is Combat Magic. PUBG Mobile also runs well on this. I kind of just included this as a throwback. Here are both RuneScape games running with slight screen mapping. Super Mecha Champions is a game that I always like to test, and it's amazing on Odin.
Perfect hit. Feels good. Pray it's your only fate.
Just like PUBG, we have no issues with Call of Duty Mobile.
Enemy contact! Tango down! Contact with enemy! Enemy down!
Finishing up with some MOBA games, we have Arena of Valor,
You have defeated an enemy.
It burns! It burns!
and Wild Rift.
Enemy rampage.
Your pile blinds you.
You have slain an enemy.
That's going to be it for this first video on the Odin Pro, but I have a bunch of content on the way, so make sure to stay tuned. If you want to buy an Odin device, you can find a link to their IGG down below. It's not an affiliate link, and I'm not sure when they'll be selling this on their own website. If you do have any questions, leave those down below and consider taking a look at a video that I did showing the emulation performance of the D900 processor that's in the Odin Lite using a phone with that processor. I'm really looking forward to that Odin. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.